What's up, guys? I am Yojimbo, and today we have an action-packed podcast to dissect. Chris Wilson has joined the Baeclast crew to provide some insight on what happened with the launch of Expedition, what to expect in the future, and answer some community questions that have been asked for a while now. I'm going to attempt to do this all in one take today, so if I do have some errors and some mispronunciations and whatnot, we're just going to have to work with them. I've streamed myself for 10 hours today, which you can find over at twitch.tv/itsyojimbo. And I've spent a few more hours re-watching the Baeclast event because I was too stupid to take notes the first time. Take notes the first time, guys. And then I've also taken the time to now record this video. So let me shrink down into a smaller version of myself, and we will get into the content here. There we go. That's me. That's me. That's these guys. We have Target Cat, we have Chris Wilson, Octavian, Race QT, Nuji, and Ziggy D. These are all some great content creators, and of course Chris Wilson with GGG. I'll have their links in the description below to check out their channels personally. Though, if you're here watching me, I assume you know who they are, as they're much bigger content creators than I am. Let's jump in. First up, we have the big question on everybody's mind. Where's the zoom, right? That's the thing. That's Reddit. That's what everybody wants. That's everybody wants to zoom, jumping from pack to pack, blowing up the screen, doing the thing, right? That's the first question we have up. What is happening?
This campaign to just ruin the game patch after patch, if you see what I mean. We do want to continue to improve the challenge, and we are making the monsters more challenging and scary, and the whole, it's going to feel like the awesome Path of Exile of closed beta is true, but not in the way that I think people are worried about. The zooming isn't really going away. Sure, there were movement skill changes that adjust the zooming slightly, but it's one of those things where, the games that, looking at Path of Exile 2, for example, right? A lot of people are really worried because they've seen some footage of level 16 gameplay, right? This is literally the point just after you've killed Merveil in Path of Exile 1, essentially. You're not really that zoomy at that stage.
I think that's a good point to make, is that people are seeing this content that's put out, and they're building their expectations based off of that, which at face value seems fine, right? GGG shows you the content, and that's what you that's what you expect. But you have to put it into the correct space. They're not doing maps in this content, right? Like you just said, this is after Merveil. You're on maybe a 2-link, maybe your movement skill is by itself. You have 10% movement speed on your boots, right? So you can't really compare that to doing maps. It seems like they do not want to take the zooming idea out of the game, but maybe just tune back the zooming a little bit. We'll jump on to the next part where I thought was very interesting, where Chris talks about his TTK for monsters. But not something we've heard them talk about very much before. I believe this is at 111 and 50 seconds.
They're encountered, whereas our ideal situation is, the white monster gets off half an attack, the blue monster actually gets a chance to do an attack, and rare monsters last more than 1.5 seconds, ideally.
That's not something that currently exists at all, unless you're playing a very, very homebrew, non-meta, maybe using a strike skill, in Path of Exile. Right now, there isn't really any differentiation between white packs and blue packs, and even some low-level yellow packs. I mean, they all just get blown up in one hit, right? So essentially, what they're talking about here is maybe trying to, when categorizing these mobs, making the rare mobs harder than what they currently are. And when I say harder than they currently are, I mean your generic rare mob, not your aura stacked Legion rare mob. Those are a completely different category. We'll skip to 112.50.
Is something you don't want to have to do 4 times a year. The problem really was some of the nerfs we did were just wrong, right? We don't.
That's a very important sentence. The nerfs were wrong, right? They can admit that, and that's one thing I do like about Chris Wilson and GGG is they can come out and they don't mind saying we've made a mistake and here's how we're going to fix it.
Like the result of the flash changes, we did not like the result of the mana changes. We're completely agreeing with the feedback. Like yesterday we had a meeting, which is basically we screwed up on several fronts with these changes. Like there was discussion of reverting all the Flask stuff back to the Flask piano state, and we have a better solution, which I can, freely talk about if needed. But
the question does pop up though: is how did it get to that point? Is there not enough time in between leagues? Do they not have enough time to test? We know that they have alpha and beta testers for the league. We know that they provide a ton of feedback to GGG. So how does something like the mana changes and the flash changes make it through to the main game? That we don't really have an answer for. I think we're going to skip to 114.50 now.
Been reviewed in a long period of time. So pre 315, mana wasn't in a particularly great state from a mattering kind of point of view. Stuff was a bit easy. So the 315 changes were relatively aggressive and were not tested fully on enough builds. And so we've rolled that back to a better place, which we're pretty happy with. But I definitely think a further review is necessary. If there are builds that don't work, and if they should work, which I'm assuming they should, then that's probably something we want to look at.
I think that's a very good point to make there. If there's builds that don't work currently, they need to be looked at, and they don't have a way of knowing testing every single build in the game. I know that Chris Wilson during this interview quite a few times has put his email address out there, and he says, please email me with this concern so that we can get it fixed. Obviously, he doesn't want 60,000 players sending him an email at one time, but if there is something very specific that is very broken in an interaction that you have found with a skill, it might be worth trying to get in direct contact, or maybe even getting in contact with Bex and being, look, this is the thing that's happening. They did revert back a lot of the mana changes. Some of them are still very bad, such as spell slinging. I don't agree with that change at all. I don't even play spell slinger builds, but that build, that change seems very, very, very aggressive to me, especially for something that generally doesn't get used in the end game, right? You go through the leveling and maybe the early maps as a spell slinger, and then you usually get down into what your main build is, right? He is correct in that mana hasn't mattered in quite a while. Honestly, I've been playing since Betrayal. Mana hasn't mattered since then. You reserve 99.9% of your mana, sometimes even 100% of certain different interactions in the game. And it doesn't matter. There's always ways around it. You energy shield as mana, or using your life, to cast your skills, or rage, or whatever it is. And it's an incredibly strong, interaction. Especially if you don't need your mana, it's 100% upside, no downside. Reserve 4 or 5 auras, right? You have Pride, you have War Banner, you have Herald of Purity, you got Precision on, you got Vitality on, and you're just buffing yourself out of control. And this isn't even talking about the aura stacker levels of auras. This is just your average player, taking advantage of everything they can reasonably take advantage of. I do hope that they look at some of those interactions that they might have missed with skills that just aren't working anymore, or builds that aren't working anymore. And hopefully we'll see that coming into the future. Let's get to 115.50. It seems like a lot of these are ending on 50 here.
And do you want Path of Exile to be a slower game?
We have a problem with someone entering a screen full of monsters and them already being dead on the ground because their attacks were able to kill them off screen before there was any meaningful combat, right? That's the thing we want to address. We do not want it to be a slow game. Like, let's say it's running at 1500% and we want it to run at 800%, right? It's still a very fast game. We're not trying to make it so you methodically fight each pack hand to hand, like some of the Path of Exile 2 footage where the player's enjoying doing that. That's because that's a low-level character trying to demo off mechanics and so on. So, I don't know, should we make footage of us playing maps and say this is how fast we expect it to be? Maybe that's easier, but it's still fast, right? It's still going to be action-packed, relatively quick map runs. We just want there to actually be a game.
I think the problem with this is that a lot of the information that's being given right here, and a lot of the assumptions, they are they're based on the person themselves, right? So what does he say? He doesn't want to slow down the content, drastically. He says if you're going from 1,500% to 800%, that's a reasonable thing, right? And that probably is reasonable if you are somebody who plays the game at between 100% and 800% yourself, right? But it's not a very reasonable change if you're the person that's playing at 1,500%. That's not me. That doesn't affect me. But there is a lot of people that does affect. If you are the hyper juicer zoomer, and your speed is essentially going to be cut in half by that example that he had provided, that's a significant change to your playstyle. And if playing that style of game was fun to you, then playing the 800% style game is not going to be fun for you. Something else he touched on was maybe showing footage of what their expectations are, right? Setting expectations. And I think that would actually be a very good thing. It could come back to bite them in the end where they show what their expectations are, right? Setting expectations, and then it doesn't end up being that thing, right? That could be bad, and that could be very bad for them in the future. If they do want to set expectations, my suggestion would be give a time that you expect a type of player to complete a map on average, right? We know that they benchmark the players, right? You know that they have benchmarks on how fast players complete X map on average, right? So red maps, juiced up delirium maps, whatever the case may be, right? So maybe setting the expectation by saying, a red map should take you as a fully geared, juiced up character, a red map should take you a full 2 minutes to clear start to finish. Yellow map should be done in a minute, right? Whatever the case may be. Maybe that's the expectation that people want, so that they know what they should be getting into when they get into it. We'll skip to 1:18:30 here.
Don't even want to play fast builds into playing fast builds, Legion, Incursion, etc.
This is an interesting thing we've had a bit of a chat about, where you want to encourage people to play more powerful characters so that items and skills and player skill actually matter, right? The game has to implicitly say, you have done a better job than you were doing before. Here is more stuff as a result. If you design leagues where performing better has no benefit, then it is not as fun, because the act of growing your character and improving it has less payoff. And so implicitly, this type of game has a little bit of a speed clear thing kind of going on, saying to you, if you work out a way to kill monsters more effectively, to do it in a safer way so you can keep fighting longer and so on, you get more rewards. Kind of has to be the direction it's going. Now, that doesn't mean we need to have, timers everywhere. And we're kind of alternating. Expedition, for example, didn't explicitly have timers, but we were careful not to point that out because we don't want to make a promise of no more timers.
I think that's very good. The timers are a huge gate for new players. A huge gate for new players. For me, it was, in particular. And like I said, I started in Betrayal, which started out as kind of a screwy league anyway, right? In terms of balance, it was very easy to get one shot in those situations. But aside from that, you had a timer to finish, not a timer specifically on your screen, but you had to finish the laboratories in a certain amount of time, right? Or else what is it called, evidence. All of the evidence was destroyed, right? You didn't do the thing. My character couldn't do it. It was my very first character. I was brand new to the game. I simply could not do it. Aside from being one shot every time and having to run back because I was too stupid to make a portal, at the thing. Even without that, my character couldn't do it, right? Now, by the time I got to Legion League, I was a little more experienced of a player, right? And I was able to clear, let's say, 50% of a Legion, right? One whole half of it, and maybe touching in on the other side. I wasn't playing meta Cyclone. I wasn't playing meta, Val, Ice Nova, or whatever else it was that was being played then. I think I was playing... Oh, I know what I was playing. I was playing Val Fireball. That's what I was playing. A self-cast, because I didn't know any different, back then. Val Fireball. And I would stand in the middle of the Legion. And this is before I completely understood, what the Legion event was. I didn't know that the good stuff was on the outskirts of the Legion and stuff like that. I would stand in the middle, hit the button, hit my Val Fireball, and and it would send out a bunch of fireballs, and then I would just shoot off fireballs in every direction, that the legions were, and I cleared what I deemed for myself an acceptable amount of the legion every time. I never got to do like a 5-way or anything like that. I never got a full stack of splinters or anything like that. But I had fun. And I think the more we go into these timed things, the bigger the gate gets for the new players. Expedition, now they don't have a timer, right? And you can do whatever you want. You take as long as you want to do it. You can AFK in the expedition. It doesn't matter. You can set the explosives. Go get a drink, right? There's no care in the world. And I enjoy that a lot, particularly. I also enjoyed Metamorph a lot, and that might be for the same reason, right? You can take all the time you want before you spawn that Metamorph and fight it. Maybe it's a personal thing, but I particularly like the non-timer content more than I like the timer content. I like that they're alternating and trying different types of content to see what works better. I think that's very important. Let's see. We switched to 1:18:30, which we're pretty close. Oh, nope. Sorry. That's what we were on. So we go to 1:21:55. Well, this is an important topic.
Regarding additional player power and additional player defenses. This is something that does guide a lot of our balance decisions. And I think you will find in the future that there is... I've got to be careful here because those plans aren't particularly clear, but we're trying to make sure that there are easier defensive options available to more characters so that people are able to invest in that easily if they need to. It implicitly comes at the cost of speed clearing, of course, because you are choosing passive points and where to allocate them or choosing what items to wear. But yeah, we're not 100% happy with the state of defenses either.
Most people aren't.
My point is...
most people aren't happy with defense, and Ziz covered this in great length in a recent clip. I don't know if it got made into an actual video or not, but there's no point in going in defense a lot of times now. In every league, we're seeing that defense is being stripped away from us, and because of that, it makes offense the best defense, right? It's a tale as old as time. The best defense is a good offense, right? It takes a lot to invest into ailment immunity unless you're in a very specific part of the tree or unless you're a very specific ascendancy, right? It takes a lot. And on top of needing to do it in your ascendancy or tree, you also need to do it in a couple of crafts on your pieces of gear a lot of times, right? You're taking the crystal skin nodes and then you need to craft it on a couple pieces of gear. Or you need to get some really specific crafts on your gear, like cannot be frozen, not affected by burning ground, or whatever the case is, to try to mitigate those things. And as those things go away, the more important thing is just killing stuff before it kills you. That's the best defense. I would like to see more defensive options come in the future. I would like there to be more ways to invest in ailment immunity and defense and evasion. And maybe in different forms of defense that we don't even have in the game yet. That would be nice. I think the reason people don't use defense is because there's not enough defense for us to use. So we just opt for offense instead. We'll go to 123:40 where we talk about some flasks.
I have not prepared a script for.
Just to clarify, these are, as he just said, unscripted flask leaks for the future.
So the first changes within Kindling Orbs, the team are discussing buffing them carefully as high as they can go, right? So they basically want more power through Kindling Orbs, and they think there's some room there. The next thing is a complete revisit of all mods on flasks, and they want to separate this so there are two completely different mod pools. The first mod pool is for proactive mods that occur on utility flasks, and reactive mods is a second mod pool that occur on life and mana flasks. Because there's this implicit problem at the moment where you have two totally different purposes. Either you need to recover resources, in which case you have something during that, or you believe a situation is about to occur. It's kind of pointless to have certain mods on certain types of flasks.
Right, so the flasks that are on the mods, they've been there for a very long time. And a lot of them will quite literally never get used, right? They don't serve a purpose. The only purpose they serve unintentionally is to make rolling your flasks more annoying. right? Because you get these mods that you don't need. The enkindling orbs and the infusing orbs, or instilling orbs, sorry, they've come into the game, and the idea behind these is good, right? The idea behind being able to enchant your flasks with these abilities at its core value is good. The way it was implemented, not so much. I think reworking the flask modifiers and the way we craft our flasks and whatnot, and I like this idea of proactive and reactive, being able to use your flasks at the correct time, giving that more meaning in the game. Overall, I think that would be a good change. I think he goes on to talk about instilling orbs at 133.23. 133.23.
Especially instilling orbs, right? It bricks the item if you get the wrong trigger condition on it, and there were like 15 of them. So that was dumb. We fixed that already, I believe, but you are completely right about accessibility of that.
That's a short one to watch, but what he said there was he thinks that they fixed that problem. Excuse me. I'm not aware of any fixes that have been made for that. Last I was aware is that they wanted to add the modifiers onto the crafting bench as like master crafts, and that hasn't been done yet. You still have to roll your your flask with instilling orbs to get the modifier that you need, or else, like he said, it can unintentionally brick the item, right? If you have a flask, let's just say, for example, you're using a sulfur flask, and you want the modifier that says it'll trigger, or you'll consume the flask when you hit a rare unique monster. That's reasonable, right? You really don't need your sulfur flask for white mobs and blue mobs. It was just a waste of a click, honestly. You're going to kill them in one hit anyway. So it automatically triggers when you hit a rare unique monster, which is good. But I rolled that flask 25 times, I have on my notes here, and I haven't gotten the modifier. So now, instead, I'm stuck with a modifier on my sulfur flask that says it triggers. I don't remember which one is on there. I believe it's the one that triggers when the duration runs out of it, or something. Like it automatically triggers when the duration is currently run out of it, or something along those lines. It's something completely useless that does the complete opposite effect of the effect I wanted. I wanted it to use it at a very specific time when I'm attacking a rare monster, and now it's just being used whenever it feels like it, essentially. The flask isn't there when I need it. So if we could get that fix in, I like the idea of the instilling orbs and the enkindling orbs. It needs to be, refined, I guess is the correct word. We'll skip to 134.40. Let me just double check that. Ailment changes, right? This kind of goes back to what we were talking about defenses.
Buffs and effects on the Pantheon. Add one for each ailment, immunity, minor ideally, but freeze on lightning.
I'm going to go back a little bit.
All right, so the team want to bring back
There we
a
go.
lot of ailment mitigation. They've said further add ailment mitigation or avoidance to skills, for example, purity of fire, ice, lightning, purity of elements. Adding more powerful mitigation to various debuffs and effects on the Pantheon. Add one for each ailment, immunity, minor ideally, but freeze on Bright King. The ones we build monsters around, like igniting poison, should be high reduced effects instead of complete immunity. Add clusters to the passive tree to mitigate poison and bleed, similarly symmetrically to crystal skin. Add mitigation to bleed to steel skin, potentially changing bone armor from the necromancer ascendancy. Add mitigation to ignite to molten shell. Add additional corrupted implicits on various items, but jewels in particular for mitigating ailments. Change consecrated ground to provide 50% reduced effect of curses on those with buff moving curse effect mitigation cluster to be more central and thus more accessible. Add additional jewel mods to regular jewels for mitigating ailments to the regular mod pool. Audit existing avoidance and mitigation mods, in some cases buffing them. For example, the Abyss jewel ailment avoidance mods currently can be up to 20%, changes to be 35% or so. Audit crafting options for mitigating ailments and ensure there are enough options, especially at low levels. Change shield ailment avoidance mod to be on all shields. Add crafting options for cannot be shocked, chilled, ignited, poisoned, take no extra damage from bleed while moving, cannot be frozen from the Brine King, and so on.
That was a lot of information to take in right there, right? But to condense it all down, better options for ailment immunity for players, right? More accessible, easier to get, a little bit less investment than it currently is, and more options as to where to put it instead of what we currently have. Also, one thing that I really took away from that I really, really like, and it's something that I think Path of Exile will... what's the word I'm looking for here? It just feels like it fits in Path of Exile, right? Is using these already existing skills to give you unique ailment immunities based on the type of skill that it is, such as Steel Skin giving you immunity to bleed, right? That makes sense. If you have Steel Skin, you probably aren't going to be bled, right? If you're using Molten Shell, you should be immune to burning, ignite. If you're using Frost Armor, cannot be frozen. If you're using, what's the electric one? Tempest Shield? If you're using Tempest Shield, immune to shock, right? These things already exist in, like, it's already in the game, right? Like, the idea is already there. It just needs to be implemented. And it adds a lot of flavor to these skills, which is something that I think PoE does very well, is their flavor of things in the game. Now, also adding to the Pantheons. The Pantheons are, I mean, let's be honest, we use them because they're there, but they're mostly useless. I would go as far as to say, and this is a random statistic I'm pulling out of my ass, 99% of players probably don't ever upgrade their Pantheon. They probably don't know how, because it's not really explained in the game, right? It's just an unused asset, and it's unfortunate because the Pantheon is actually a really cool thing that adds just a little bit of uniqueness to your character, you know? And it's something that can be changed on the fly, right? So, like, if they have the ailment immunities in there, if I'm doing a Vertania map, maybe I'll put on the Brine King. I'll be immune to freeze, right? If I'm going to fight, who else? Al Hazim. I'll do poison, right? Like, you can change that around on the fly from map to map. Which means you don't need to invest hard into, you know, taking up a suffix on your gear or taking a specific cluster node on your tree or something like that. Those are like hard investments, where the Pantheon would be like a soft investment, where you're not always going to be immune to cold. But if you know you have a big cold fight coming up, you can put on the Brine King and be immune to freeze. I think that's a very good idea. So we'll switch over to, now this is going to switch back to Flask Talk. Obviously, the podcast goes back and forth in the conversations. This is 138.10.
Need to maintain them. So I would actually like to ask, how do you make flasks as a tool that faster builds have available when they need them, would then be more available for slower builds? Because let's say you want to engage in a pack and you have decided that, well, we want to keep power in flasks, we want them to feel impactful, but gaining 5 charges when you get hit is completely unreasonable, right? Or when I get crits. Like, these are like the mods that are currently on the flasks, and these are the ones that would then kind of encourage you to have longer engaged fights, but they don't really work. They only work for speed clearing.
Yeah, fair enough. I will make sure the team discuss that. I can't.
Right, so we have no real answer from Chris Wilson on this, because, I mean, honestly, what is he going to say? Like, he's going to say either, yeah, we'll work on it, no, we won't work on it, right? So he's going to bring it back to the team, and maybe they come back, hopefully they come back with an improved method of this. But what Nuji is talking about here is that the problem where, and almost like in just your everyday world, right, where the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, right? The same thing happens in PoE, where the fast get faster and the slow hit a brick wall. And this happens with flasks. Fast players don't have a problem with their flasks, right? You piano your flasks still, even after the changes for the season. Piano your flasks. You whirling blades through 6 packs of enemies and kill them all, right? Your flasks are all back. Piano again. Repeat, rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat, right? Map is done. There's no change from the way it was before. But slow players, people who are like individually fighting packs and stuff like that, they hit an even harder wall now with the flask changes. It was already hard to upkeep flasks all the time, but manageable. And now with the changes, it's even harder for them to be able to catch up. And sometimes they just don't, right? That's how these players get stuck in white maps and yellow maps. And we have this statistic, right, that the majority of players playing the game never even make it to red maps. And it's reasons like this that happens. They can't get good gear progression. They're stunted by things like these flash changes, mana changes, nerfs, whatever whatever the case is, aura stacking enemies and whatnot. So yeah, there needs to be a system in place. Well, I shouldn't say needs to be. There should be a system in place, to help the lower end of players that need this assistance. The Flash should work for everybody. I think that for a long time, Path of Exile has been, either you get it or you don't. Right? That's the thing. It doesn't matter if you push away new players because the game has too much of a learning curve. That's just the way it is, right? Go play Diablo 3 if you want to be that kind of a player. But I think as the game grows and continues to grow, eventually you have to start lessening that slope, right? So the new players can get in. Because your old players eventually just aren't going to play anymore. Whether they're getting too old or they're getting bored or a new game has come along, or maybe they're just not gaming anymore, or whatever the case is, you have to continue to keep an influx of new players, right, to replace those players that aren't playing anymore. And if your barrier of entry is too high because of things like this, eventually in maybe it's a slow bleed, but eventually the game dies, right? Eventually the game dies. So we want to prevent that from happening because we all love Path of Exile. We don't want anything like that to happen. We switched to we switched to a big one, 142-225. This is a big one.
A mode to Path of Exile where itemization is entirely different than what people know at the moment. Is basically the ultimate challenge where, getting through Act 1 is challenging. Getting any further through the storyline is very difficult. Getting to maps is difficult for most players, right? Making any progress in maps is hard due to significant item scarcity. And by this I mean, you find a rare and you say, yes, a rare, what is it? What can I do with this? This has trade value, right? It's a quiver. People are going to want a rare quiver. I don't need it, but someone else is going to. And it's exciting, right? The currency is so limited in this potential mode that the ability to add mods to items is an incredible thing. And
so what he's talking about here, and I think I cut off the beginning of it, he's talking about a hard mode, a masochist mode, right, is what they've referred to it as. Internally, they call it hard mode. They're talking about implementing this possibly in the next patch, in the next expansion, the next league. This is going to essentially be Path of Exile with Diablo 2 itemization, right? Unless if you've been playing video games the last 20 years and you like ARPGs, you've played Diablo 2 and you know what it's like. Every item that drops when you're a new player is important. The blue items, the white items. You're very lucky to see a rare item that's usable for your character. Sockets are hard to come by. Runes are extremely hard to find. A lot of times you finish the game with blue items on, right? Or low tier rares. And it's hard to progress and it's a challenge. And I think that's, a lot of people really like that in Diablo 2. That doesn't really translate to Path of Exile, right? In Path of Exile, you start out with, white and blue items. You get your first alchemy orb, you get in rares, you interact with the league mechanic, it gives you rares, and from there you're snowballing into better rares and some uniques, and eventually you're in GG items. So it's a totally different pace. So what they're talking about here is in hard mode that you would tick when you make your character, right? So you make your character, you have hardcore, you have SSF, and now you're at a new tick box that says, hard mode, whatever they're going to call it when it releases. And in this, there's going to be Diablo 2 type itemization. It's going to be very challenging. Items will not be dropping. When you find a ring, it will be important, even if it's not specific for your character. It's going to be a stat that you didn't have before, right? If you get a rare quiver, which is what he was talking about here, it's going to have value, depending on how many other people are playing this mode. Trading will be important. Now, I'm all about this. This is my jam, and I will be partaking. Other people might not be for everybody. right? We have a problem right now. The whole reason we're having this conversation, this podcast, is because the game is already too difficult for a lot of people. Putting out a more difficult mode is kind of counterintuitive to the point we're talking about here, but I will be enjoying this. I'm going to listen for a second, see if he goes on to say anything else that I might have missed.
So we've been experimenting with this, right? And initially this was just a thought experiment, right? This isn't something we can release. I have no idea what chat is saying there, but it's probably not pretty. This is something that's incredibly divisive, right? Most Path of Exile players will say, cool, I'm actually happy with getting a ton of items, like finding 200 players.
Right, I think he just goes on to explain, and he does clarify what I was just saying there, right? Most Path of Exile players would not be wanting to play this mode. But the fact that it exists, completely optional, I'm down with. 146.30.
Game, let's do them in 3.15. All players will appreciate the improvements that we believed that they were going to have, such as addressing power creep and so on, solving RFI. You know, we're not going to just improve flasks in hard mode. That's weird. It's not meant to be an alpha for features, right? So the stuff we did for 3.15 was pulled out as things we thought was safe. And sure, we made judgment mistakes there. We paid the consequences. We ended up with a 30% revenue reduction that we were trying to avoid with all of this to the
Right. So at the beginning of that sentence, he says that all players will enjoy the changes. And I think that that is just like at a base level a part of the problem. That you have your staff at GGG, all right, and you have your alpha and beta testers, and then they're a part of a circle, and then you have another circle of the players, right? And your staff and your testers, a very small percentage of players, compared to everybody else, you're like, yeah, everybody's going to like these. These would be great. Everybody will enjoy these. But then you get the big group, the 60, 70, 80, 100,000 players, and nobody likes it. The majority doesn't like it, right? So I think it's, I don't want to use the words out of touch, but I don't know what words to use here. I think it's short-sighted to make a comment like everybody will enjoy the changes. And obviously, I think, they go on to, Chris Wilson goes on to say, they made a mistake. They recognize the mistake. They're doing what they can to fix it. And hopefully it's just not a thing in the future, right? 147.40. This is kind of a funny comment here.
16 is an alternate mode that you don't have to play. That's really a whole lot of fun. And try it out, and you won't get very far because it's brutal and there are no items, and like we're just lobotomizing everything. You don't have to play. Like, that's probably not
Just
something
re-listen
that's
to
politically
that.
great to announce on a live stream. So we're just throwing it out there that a thing that will probably be in 3.16 is an alternate mode that you don't have to play. That's really a whole lot of fun. And try it out, and you won't get very far because it's brutal and there are no items, and like we're just lobotomizing everything.
I can't tell if he's trying to bait Reddit with that comment or if he actually means it. But either way, the results of it should be great. You won't get very far, right? He didn't say you may not get very far. He said you won't get very far. That's a challenge. That's a challenge that Twitch streamers, content creators in general, Reddit, Twitter goers, whoever is going to take that challenge, and we know how this stuff works. Day one, somebody will be through the content, right? And Chris Wilson's going to say, "What the fuck?" Because you know how it is. You know how people are. I thought that was just a funny thing to kind of try to challenge Reddit with you won't get very far in the hard mode. This next one is a little bit of a long voice com from Ray's QT here, but I found it very interesting. It was a very, very good question. I believe it starts here.
Want it so you can finish a map in 4 seconds or anything like that. I
But that's
understand that
Oh yeah,
the intention is
I'm gonna go back a little bit.
nice. Our intention
Guys we're looking at, the entire chat exploded. You did talk a lot
Here we
about
go.
the direction of the core game, and you did mention, for instance, that players were killing mobs off screen. The entire chat exploded with, but that's the fun of Path of Exile. They don't play Path of Exile to play Diablo or maybe whatever other ARPG you guys were looking at when you were kind of deciding on changing the systems, what would it mean for them? Would the game continue in the same exact fashion, or would it possibly be speeding up as we are separating the player base with something like this?
So before Chris Wilson, puts his answer in here, I just want to just make sure I understand what we're talking about here. Race Coutinho is saying you're putting a hard mode into the game to appease the people who want a harder mode to play the game. What does that mean for the Zoomers, right? What do the Zoomers get in trade for that?
So our
You
intention
guys are,
here,
sorry. We're not doing
intention-
anything. You guys are doing it.
nice. Our intention here is not to let mainline. Once we take the masochists out of mainline Path of Exile
Yes.
if they like this mode, the intention is not to then let the game go completely to the dogs, if you know what I mean, right? Like we don't want it so you can finish a map in 4 seconds or anything like that. I
Well, that's
understand
fun.
that people like
Right? So he says, but that's fun. And that's the thing, right? So, and look, I think where he paused here on Chris Wilson's face is a perfect example of probably how he feels with answering this question, right? And you can see a smirk from Tarkcat here. You can see a smirk from Ziggy D here. And that's the thing is that, GG, it's their game, right? It's Chris Wilson's game and their game at GGG. And I agree that they need to build the game in a way that they want to build it because it's their vision. It's their baby. It's their art project. It's their, that's their thing, right? There's no point in making a game if you're going to make it in a way that doesn't make you happy, right? If you build it, they will come. That's how it goes, right? But in the process, if you're changing your vision from what it's been from the last couple of years, the people who are currently there are going to leave, right? So the question is, what are the acceptable losses from GGG, right? We heard him say a 30% revenue loss from this league because of the over nerfing and stuff like that. So how much are they willing to sacrifice to get back to their vision? If the I don't want to say the majority because it's not, because the Zoomers do not make up the majority. The majority of players, in my opinion, I don't have a statistic to back this up, but the majority of players, in my opinion, are people quite opposite on that spectrum. They're the people who play extremely slow, barely make it through the campaign, take a week to do it if they do, it gets stuck in white and low yellow maps, and then end up quit playing a month into the league. The Zoomers make up probably a small percentage at the top, the 1%, as they say. So it's hard to say. Should they cater to the Zoomers, right? Should that be a thing? The Zoomers also do a thing of providing for everybody else in terms of the economy, right? So they also provide for everybody else. They're very important to the economy. So what Race QT is trying to say here is who's saying what is fun, right? If you have this large group of people saying that zooming is fun and clearing a map in 4 seconds is fun, why are we saying it's not, right? Why are we acting like it's not fun? Because obviously there's this demographic of people who think it is. And a lot of Twitch chat are those people.
Yeah, I mean, we just don't want it to get 10 times faster than it currently is. So I understand people have fun killing monsters off screen. They'll probably be able to. Like, at the end of the day, the changes we made in 3.15, which I emphasize are the only significant nerfs coming soon. Like, that was it. That was us firing our volley as it was. They didn't really change a lot, right? Like, we're benchmarking players, and they're mostly playing at the same speed as they were before. We bought some room from power creep, but... Sorry, you were saying?
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I thought you were finishing the statement there. But I would agree with you to some extent there, but disagree on the specifics of it. Like, there are still builds that are blowing up a screen of monsters. You're right. There's builds that are blowing up a screen. There's builds that are blowing up things off screen. But that is the tip of the iceberg, and the vast amount of builds underneath said tip of the iceberg got hit, and some of them got hit much, much harder, to the point where they are essentially unplayable in any sort of competitive setting. If you want to go at a decent pace, if you have standards that are close to previous leagues or something like that. So go ahead, Ziggy.
I was gonna say, to echo that from the softcore side of things, players are gravitating to fewer builds, or they're building their characters with less and less focus on defenses and tolerating more.
I think that a lot of that comes into literally what I was just saying, and I didn't intentionally say it before them. I had totally forgotten about Octavian's dialogue there. No offense, Octavian, but I think that his iceberg analogy is exactly what I was talking about. Like the Zoomers are the top 1%, right? They're the tip of the iceberg, and then the majority of players are still are underwater. You don't see them. They're the people who quit before yellow maps, and it takes them a week and a half to get there or whatever. I'm not sure where that's going to lead people to, but I do trust in GGG to have a plan and to get us there. Let's see, where do we go now? 155.10. This is I'm going to touch on this because it's something that I had suggested as a meme to Quinn actually. When we were talking about the difference between we were talking about trying to quell Reddit's rage and like what would make them happy and stuff like that. And Ray's kind of touches on it here, so.
A totally different experience when items have incredible value because you just don't have them and you really need some.
Don't you think that something like this opens an opportunity for other people to ask, okay, you made this like awesome mode, perfect for the hardcore soul self-found cucks, now made a mode for the zoomers, for the people who want to go fast, who do want to clear maps in 4 seconds. Do you think that people are going to begin to ask for the thing that is more relevant to the other side of the spectrum, the more core game?
We've come to realize over time that, so here's a fundamental design thing. I have felt as a designer that it is cool to have content that I cannot get to, right? There's content that's too hard for me, and if I want to get to it, I have to be smarter or play better and stuff. I feel that's nice for there to be aspirational content that I can't reach.
I'm going to stop it there because he goes into something that we talk about in a future point. But what Ray's QT is pointing out here is that if you're going to put a hard mode into the game, what are you going to put into the game for the other side of the spectrum, the people who want to zoom, right? And obviously they're probably not going to do that. He's kind of just like poking the tiger with that question. But I had suggested when we're talking about in Quinn's chat, we're talking about how Reddit's never happy, blah blah blah, that kind of thing. And it's an echo chamber of a lot of people complaining, and there's a lot of good information you can find on Reddit. And I'm not somebody that says all of Reddit is a dumpster fire and is completely toxic and stuff like that. There's good stuff on Reddit and there's bad stuff on Reddit. You'll find that anywhere. But I had suggested that if you wanted to, quell the anger of Reddit, what if they came out with a meme league? Like, remember the Battle Royale came out as an April Fool's joke. What if they did a similar thing to appease the hyper zoomer crowd, right? So you don't have to go through the campaign, right? You start out at, let's say, level 70 in white maps. Your character always has 75 resistances. Monsters die as soon as you hit them. They can't hit you. You have minimum 50% movement speed. So on and so forth. Like literally, all you do is just zoom through the map, one click killing everything. You can't die. Everything else dies instantly, right? Which is what people assume that they want, in the game, right? And I'm sure there is a small group of people who really would like that type of thing. And as I was thinking about it, we kind of already got that with Harvest, right? With Harvest, gave you extreme deterministic crafting. You can make anything you want, so it's just little investment. And it was made aware to us before the league came out that this was intended to, break the system, right? It was not intended to be the future of Path of Exile. It was meant to push the limits, to go over the limits, and see how far people could take deterministic crafting, right? And then, so when they took it away, and then eventually brought it back, people were upset because they wanted that thing they had, right? There's blood in the water, so to say. That they had it and they wanted it back. I feel like that's what would happen if they did a meme league where everything dies instantly and you can never die and you start at maps and blah 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 blah. Who knows though? Who knows? I think now we go into that next part that they were getting ready to talk about, 155.40, end game content. Yeah, it's like right where
Core game.
We've come to realize over time that, so here's a fundamental design thing. I have felt as a designer that it is cool to have content that I cannot get to.
I
right?
agree.
There's content that's too hard for me, and if I want to get to it, I have to be smarter or play better and stuff. I feel that's nice for there to be aspirational content that I can't reach, including like mainline stuff. And occasionally we'll introduce something like the Shaper or the Elder or Cyrus or whatever, and that's seen as content that the player's excited about. I haven't got there yet. What's it going to be like? How hard is it? Shit, it killed me, blah, blah, blah. You get the idea, right? And then over time there grows a being used to it. People have killed these bosses so many times that if we now say, okay, in the current version of the game, you can't kill those bosses without a bunch of work, people are super angry. Like, that's not the right direction to go in. And so essentially what we're saying here is that mainline Path of Exile is the game where a normal-ish player, like, you know, everyone who plays Path of Exile is a bit of a power gamer, but a normal-ish power gamer has the ability to play through the content and an expectation that they can actually see it. Like, we're not doing that thing where we're making bosses for the 1%, if you see what I mean.
So I agree with his take that the aspirational content, where there's got to be things, you got to have a goal to reach for, right? If you don't have a goal in the game, then you lose your reasoning for playing and you move on to other games that give you a goal, right? So the problem is, though, is season after season, you complete this goal, right? You know, Shaper comes out, like he was saying. We'll just reiterate what he was saying. Shaper comes out, hard content. You get to him, wow, everybody's amazed. You killed the Shaper, right? And every season after that, that gets less and less and less and less special, right? Because you've already done it. So what are their options? Do nothing, or make that content harder. But they came up with a nice intuitive way of doing that with doing like Uber stuff, right? But they can't just make that content harder, you know, that content specifically, because, you know, you're gonna have your players that come in and they have their, you know, let's just use for example, you're playing Arc and you're doing 500k damage, right? You go in and you kill Shaper, perfect, fantastic. They're like, well, everybody's killed Shaper a lot. We need to buff Shaper. Actually, this is, now that I'm reflecting on this, it's actually a poor example because this is exactly what they did when they buffed his HP by a huge amount. But anyway, they can't just go in and like double Shaper's HP, because then that player is going to come back with you know, the 500k arc, you know, that he played last season, and he's going to get to Shaper and he's going to try to fight him, and it's not going to go so well. And he's going to be like, what the heck? This build worked perfectly last season. Arc wasn't nerfed at all. What gives, you know? So just nerfing the monster itself is a pretty poor example. The nerf, or the buff to the monster HP and stuff doesn't really make a difference to the top end of players. Again, this is another big disconnect between the top end of players and the average player. When you're doing 10 million damage, it doesn't matter. Well, it's one extra swing to kill Shaper than it was before for you, right? It doesn't matter. And 10 million is not even a lot compared to a lot of these builds, right? But these people who are doing 500k, barely touching a million, maybe only touching a million because they have a bunch of stuff ticked in their POB that they're not even doing, right? Is the enemy shocked? Yes. You're not doing any lightning damage. You have no way of shocking, but, you know, whatever. You know, it's a big disconnect for these people. But there needs to be content in the game that you have a goal to reach, right? And it shouldn't be so hard that nobody can reach it, but it needs to be challenging enough to keep people engaged. Let's see. One point I missed there, and we touched on this later on too, but if the content gets, if killing the boss itself, right, you've killed the boss 100 times, you don't want to kill the boss again. So GG has to think of a reason that you might want to go kill that boss again. They did this kind of with Maven, right? Because now you can add the bosses to Maven. They give you a reason to, you know, repeatedly kill these bosses. Also, it's something we touch on later, chase uniques. I killed Shaper because I wanted the Shaper swords. Shaper swords were nerfed into the ground. Why do I go kill Shaper now? For what purpose, right? I've killed him 6,000 times. His uniques are useless to me. Most of them are just a few C on the trade website. Like, it's quite literally easier to go just get 3 C off the ground and trade for the item than it is to than it is for me to go kill Shaper. I think that's a very important thing. The chase uniques, I think, add a very important dynamic to fighting these bosses. 157.30. We're actually pretty close to it here. Here, Chris gets frustrated with a question. Not frustrated at the question itself, but just frustrated that the scenario is happening, right? And it kind of opens up a little bit into his thought process of things, because obviously deterministic crafting is something that a lot of people want. It's a very loud voice, and I do think that a level of deterministic crafting is good. Original Harvest level deterministic crafting, overall not good for the game. I do have a way that I think would fix that, and we will get into that. But let's listen to what Chris has to say.
The fact that there are two audiences here, and one audience wants accessibility, and we want to make sure people do have good crafting options. Like, our goal isn't to, I mean, this is frustrating because we currently have a system. Imagine you've got your items ranging from 1 to 10, right, in terms of quality. It's best if you're getting items around the middle and there's lots of room for better items possible, right? You're finding stuff that you're pretty happy with, that's letting you play the content, but there's always exciting upgrades. And in the Masochist mode, of course, you're finding items way at the bad end of the scale. There's so much room for upgrades for good items you'll never see, because the items are just terrible and you're happy with blue items, and you get the idea. I can exaggerate for a while, but you're basically getting average 2 out of 10 quality items and happy with them. Whereas in the main game, if a 6 out of 10 quality rare drops on the ground, you didn't even care because you didn't pick up any rares in that area because you're crafting 8 or 9, quality things. And so Harvest was giving you 10s with little room to improve. And we would like there to be the option for you to occasionally get lucky crafts or occasionally find lucky items on the ground that are better than what you currently have. And so we're very careful with crafting in the main game, because Path of Exile is kind of like, its itemization, it's a testament to how good the itemization of these types of games are, that Path of Exile is still working with its items the way they are. Like, the item system that Diablo 1 and 2 pioneered was so good that Path of Exile can be so liberal with powerful items and still people enjoy playing it. It's just that the thing that's missing there is the ability to get slightly better items with some work. And so we really need to retain that, even in the main game. Like, it shouldn't be that just hard mode is fun. It has to be that the main game has that fun of upgrades too. And so we acknowledge people want more deterministic ways of getting items. We just have to make sure that you can still get better items than that, so that there is something to look forward to.
Right, but
Let's listen to the reply here real quick, because I don't remember what it was.
that's not the thing. That's not the way that players play the game. People don't find items that they then equip and are an upgrade. They buy those items. Harvest enabled players to actually get the items that they wanted by themselves. They actually gave them a way to craft them. Because right now in the core game, players just don't play enough to ever farm up a reasonable amount of currency to make those items by themselves. And that's, I think, where the core of the issue lies.
We absolutely still want to work on the itemization of the main game, right? Like, our goal here, and the side question here.
A lot of very good points there, right? So I completely agree with what Chris says. You should not be able to get 10 out of 10 items so quickly, right? Because it comes to the same thing as the aspirational content. If you don't have a goal with the aspirational content, the stuff that's hard to reach, then you're going to not play the game, right? You don't have a direction. And the same thing comes with getting that stuff too easily in terms of items. When you get a 10 out of 10 item, you're done. Like, you're not looking forward to anything after that. You get the 10 out of 10 item, kill the bosses, bada bing, bada boom. You're out of here, right? The goal is to keep people playing, right? So you're going to get, I just want to point out how, like, mad Chris looks right here in this still. It looks like he's getting ready to yell at everybody. And look, all of the content creators are looking away, like they're being yelled at right now. The thing is that you need to have a clear path of upgrades, right? You need to know what it is that you're working towards. You need to know how to get there, and you need to know what it's going to give you within reason. Harvest did that. Right? That's why so many people like Harvest. Yes, Harvest was extremely overpowered, and you could get stuff extremely fast, and there was the top echelon of people, they very quickly figured out how to craft extremely good things. I do think that some things were way overpowered in terms of getting, say, Explodey mod and stuff on your chest. during that league, I am a bad crafter, right? I had just barely dipped my toes into crafting, right? Barely. But during that league, during Harvest, I was able to craft an armor double influenced with Explodey mod and attack crit, right? I believe that's what it had, and it had like resistance and life and just all kinds of stuff. And it was everything you'd ever want in an armor: 6 link, correct colors, white sockets, blah 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 blah. But after I got that armor, I did the rest of the content in the game, and then that was it. I didn't have any armor to craft for any after that. I was done. What else do I do? Oh, I got Tailwind on my boots, on a good set of boots. Okay, I'm done. I have I got Coaling Strike on my gloves. I'm done. Right? Like, it was just too easy to get that stuff, and a lot of that came from, in my opinion, the ability to buy and sell the harvest crafts. Right? Farming the crafts yourself was I think, fair-paced adventure. Right? I think it was pretty fair farming the crafts. But being able to trade for them in a shady Discord where there's a good chance of being scammed and whatnot, that's not good for the game. That's not good. We already have to learn things from outside of the game in terms of information. Having to go out of the game for trade specifically, it's just not a good look for the game. And also, it made that crafting way too easy for a lot of people. I think, this is my take, I've said it on stream before, I would be okay with harvest crafting if, when you crafted an item on your bench, so first off, you can't trade the harvest crafts, right? That's, we know that, like, don't do it like beasts and all of that stuff. We don't want, don't make the trades, the crafts tradable. And also, when you craft your item on the crafting bench, this would take some weird amount of coding, because you could always just go somewhere and drop it and somebody else picks it up. But anyway, make the item like soulbound. Let's use the word soulbound. The item is soulbound to you, right? You know how you get the split modifier and the mirrored modifier, right? They have special modifiers for those types of things. Put a harvest modifier on the item. It's soulbound to you. That way, you can use this really powerful crafting method, but you can only use it for yourself. You can't use it for profit. You can't use it to gear up your friends or sell the crafts and stuff like that. So that way you have a powerful crafting method for yourself, and you have a very direct path, for upgrades for your character. It gives your character identity. It makes you feel like you are, it is your character, and it makes it feel personal to you, right? When you find an item, or you buy an item, or you trade an item, you're trading currency. The item doesn't feel like it's yours. It technically is, right? But you didn't find that item, right? It doesn't have that ownership to it, like crafting a really good item does. I think that would be that's just my personal opinion. 159.36. We're probably pretty close to that. Actually, we're already on it. Right?
A reasonable amount of currency to make those items by themselves.
Oh, I also, I did forget that Ray's had said that. That's also a very good point. Most people who play the game do not have the ability to farm enough to craft items, let alone know how to craft the items themselves, right? They end up, if they do attempt to craft an item, chances are they're throwing away a ton of currency and not getting what they want anyway. I've even seen experienced crafters like Perry the Pig. If you watch him on Twitch, Perry, I've watched him numerous times, crafting, just throwing exalts at an item and and using the wrong craft that costs multiple exalts, right? Using wipe suffix, getting rid of suffixes or whatever when he meant to get rid of prefixes, or whatever the case may be, and completely bricking his item on accident, and and that cost him not only did it cost him his item, not only did it cost him the profits that he would have gotten from that item or the fun he would have got from using that item had he done it correctly, but also he had to throw multiple exalts at it, right? Maybe he was already 10 exalts into crafting that item, and now it's all just in the trash, right? Not because he got a bad craft, but because he just did it incorrectly, because crafting is a little complex in this game. Most players never get to that level.
That's, I think, where the core of the issue lies.
We absolutely still want to work on the itemization of the main game, right? Like our goal here, and the side question here is the decluttering, right? There's too many items that drop in regular Path of Exile, and it's too many clicks and all that kind of stuff. We're not just saying, oh, masochist mode exists, so we're not going to solve that anymore, right? We are still working on solutions for the main game, and that includes item accessibility, right? The problem where there is no need to look at items on the ground because they're going to be bad is a big problem with main Path of Exile that we need to solve.
Big problem.
Now, we've learned to do not solve this in a horribly nerfy way because then the world falls down.
True.
But it is something we're working on here. And to some extent, the learnings from the masochist mode help guide what's actually a fun way of doing that. But please don't get the impression that this is just a precursor for us dumping it in the main game, because it's a pretty different thing. But I get your point. People will want different styles of gameplay.
Before we get
People
too
seem to-
distracted... Oh, go on. No, go on.
Yeah, well, okay. There's like I'm being pulled in many different directions here because I really want to.
Here they just talk about going into talking about different things. They decide on what subject it is they want to get into next. But Chris talks about the goal to being able to declutter the game, and that's good. The idea is not to drop, quite literally in some scenarios, hundreds and hundreds of items that nobody cares about, right? Right now, there's a extremely large emphasis on quantity with a low emphasis on quality, and they want to reverse that, right? You want less items to drop and the drops to be more meaningful, whether that's through like AI looting or whatever the case is, or smart loot, I think they call it. Is it not AI loot, but same difference. This is a very important thing they're getting ready to touch on to now, and if you've watched Cute Dog's take on it, you'll understand what it is they're talking about here. But they're talking about, again, aspirational content, deep delving, fracture mods, and stuff like that. Cute Dog's take on it was extremely good. If you haven't seen that, I recommend checking them out. I don't know what their fix is for this, but let's listen to what they have to say.
Is that why are we kind of moving away from some of that?
Okay, so by aspirational content, we're talking about really hard content that exists in Path of Exile that rewards you really well, that you want to work towards, a reason to build the best characters in the game. So the two examples you gave there were deep delving and the fractured delirium mod stuff. So those were both addressed.
I'll clarify here real quick for the people who aren't going to watch Cute Dog's video on it, or who don't want to go over there and just get it here. The thing that they're talking about here with the aspirational content with deep delving and fracture modding and simulacrums is, to summarize what Cute Dog was talking about, is in the very top echelon of players, right? You have 3 different overlapping categories of players, and they fed off each other. So you had the deep delvers, right? The deep delvers give you the fracturing fossils, right? Fracturing fossils get funneled to the 5 delirium orb mappers, right? So you get your perfect 5 delirium orb map. Then you have the fracture fossils, and you make infinite, essentially, of those maps, right? So now you have infinite simulacrums being farmed from the delirium maps. You funnel the simulacrums to the simulacrum farmer, and the simulacrum farmer obviously gets just a shit ton of all kinds of loot in the game. More specifically, cluster jewels and voices, more specifically, which is one of the biggest chase items in the game, one of the most expensive items in the game. So as this process is going on, the voices then get spread out to all of these farmers, right, so that they can farm more efficiently and make better builds. And then at the same time that this is happening, the delirium farmer and the simulacrum farmer are feeding the sulfite nodes, the sulfite scarabs and divination cards and whatnot, back to the deep delver. And this process keeps repeating. And as this happens, all of the useless loot that they get, which is a ton, because they only care about the top tier stuff now, is getting fed down. This is where trickle-down economy actually works, is getting fed down to the casual players, right? This is why you're able to go onto the Path of Exile Trade website and you're able to, put in your preferences. I want a ring, 70 life, triple resistance. All of the resistances need to be, 35 or higher, blah, 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 on a 2-stone ring, blah, 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 right? And you can pick it up for 2C. That doesn't exist when you get rid of all those farmers up there. Now, I will say that I understand that fracturing 5 Delirium orb maps was not an intended situation. I do think that is an overpowered thing. I do think that nerfing Deep Delve was a little bit of a mistake, but we'll hear here in a minute how Chris says that was not particularly a nerf. It was, for all intents and purposes, a nerf, but it was really like a bug fix. It wasn't intended to work that way. Fracturing the 5 Delirium maps, that was a direct nerf. And I do think that was an extremely powerful interaction that probably didn't need to be in the game like that. But there should still be a way to reasonably do 5 Delirium maps. And you can't, right? You need to, we discussed this on stream today, you need to go to the trade website and you need to buy Delirium orbs. Most people are only selling them, one at a time because they're so scarce to come across. So you need to trade with 20, 30, 40, 50 people to get 3, 4, 5 maps up and running. And then you run those maps, and then now you have to trade with 20, 30, 40, 50 people again to get this process going. And when you add that level of work to it, it's not fun for these people anymore. And then they don't do it. And then the system breaks. And when the system breaks, the trickling down to the casual players break. And you end up in a situation right now. Now the casual players, again, have a higher barrier of entry into the content, right? Because they can't get the loot, the leveling loot that they need, right, at a acceptable price.
For different reasons. The reason why we fixed the deep delving is it was basically bugged. Like, the math didn't work at high depths, and bad stuff was happening with the item drops, and we fixed it to be how it should be, which of course is a nerf. Like, we can't just say, oh, that was a bug when the consequences have changed. But basically, it meant that delve became a lot less rewarding, in line with what the initial plan was. I have some stuff to talk about with delve. In addition, for the delirium thing, we weren't intending that people would make a perfect map and then
I have the door to the stream room closed, and the cat is like attacking underneath the door to try to get in.
And get the right sextants on it, and then fracture it forever without having to put the resources in each time. Like, of course, it's going to be very, very desirable to be able to just copy a map and play it repeatedly without the investment of any more than actually just, fracturing it. But that was basically economic abuse, right? Like, as far as we were concerned, this is like terrible that was happening. But it did highlight that people want content like that. And so we've had a look at what aspirational stuff we can come up with. And in line with the concept that a mainline Path of Exile player has an expectation of...
Again, I want to point out that I think that this problem fixes itself if delirium orbs become more accessible or the trading system gets an overhaul to where buying items isn't so brutal.
Being able to kill all the new bosses and stuff. The aspirational content will probably come in the form of like advanced versions of various things that are possible. And so this is like the earliest possible list that's been reviewed by very few people internally, but this is the type of stuff we're
Now we're getting ready to go into a new subject now. I'm going to pause it just to discuss it for a second. Excuse me. New levels of content to give people new things to reach for. Like super uber content, right? Let's see.
Discussing here, like, this is not a patch notes or a promise. It's the stuff that we're going to investigate. So what have we got? We've got dropping more delirium orbs, adding 5 to 10 waves to the end of the simulacrum, making 5 orb delirium encounters more rewarding, and 4 and 3 and 2 and 1 orb ones as well. We're discussing making the deep delving quite different so that it's incredibly more rewarding shallower, around depth 1500 or so. But it's far more difficult than it currently is. They're basically throwing away the concept of the current progression of delve and basically saying that it gets insanely difficult at 1000 to 1500, but really rewarding. Now that means people won't be breaking the same depth records they did in the past, but it also means you don't need to like delve down to 6000 or something like that to actually.
I just want to point out that he just challenged the players and read it again. saying that they won't be able to deep dive as much.
They get good rewards. In addition, we're going to make it so that if you get to tier 16 maps and then you don't delve, the catch-up mechanic puts you at a relatively deep depth, so you don't need to just play through hundreds and hundreds of really early tiers.
Huge improvement. I don't delve quite literally for that reason most of the time. I do not want to be level 80 in maps and decide that I want to go delve and then have to start at low-level content, slowly progressing my way down the delve, right? That's not fun. That doesn't feel good. So yes, being able to go into delve at a level that is relative to your character, I think that's a huge change, and I will definitely partake more in delve if that's the case.
Please.
We're considering adding the Uber domain of timeless conflict. We haven't worked out what that means, but basically taking Legion and saying what is the Uber version of that. Uber blighted maps, for example, basically going through old leagues that are working well and saying this is content, but the top characters can clear it. What if they couldn't? And then make a version of that that's incredibly difficult and incredibly rewarding. We may add Ultimatum back to the core game and then potentially allow for more than 10 waves where it just ramps up and up and up in a crazy way. There's more to this as well because we are looking at general monster balance throughout the game. We're looking at how like rare monsters are handled in terms of the mods on them. There's a bunch of stuff that can be discussed there. We're discussing maybe a new tier of breachstones beyond pure that are just incredibly difficult but incredibly rewarding. And so these are things which aren't actually that bad, right? Like in order to make this, aside from the fact of the question of what are the rewards, like do we have to make new uniques or new mod tiers or whatever, the actual content itself is pretty straightforward. You just
So more things, right? That's what people need. Is just, well, it's hard to say. More things are good, but a lot of people feel like the game is already bloated. I'm team more things. I'm good at compartmentalizing these things and, you know, doing the content that I want and not doing the content that I don't want. So more of it is good for me. But not everybody might feel that same way. Now, I will point out again that what he's suggesting here, again, creates a gap, a bigger gap. It widens the divide between the top level players and the casual players. Maybe their goal isn't to bring that gap down. You know, with a lot of the conversation today, it's been making that gap wider, wider, and wider if they were to implement these changes. If we have players that currently can't even get into 5-way events with Legion, they currently can't even do that. Adding an Uber version of that isn't gonna help those players at all. At 2:05:22, Octavian makes a good point here also.
Modes to various different bits of content. As you said, it's, you know, a preliminary list, so I doubt maybe even anything specifically there gets added, but, you know, any sort of super duper content like that. Just after a swath of nerfs that made a lot of different archetypes, playstyles, and specific skills even less viable just in like straight Alc and Go T16 maps, is going to constrict the top end of the softcore trade meta to the point where it's, you know, as constricted as perhaps we've ever seen it, where there's this handful of builds that can reliably do the T20, the super duper Uber, whatever, and most of the other ones can't. So most players will gravitate towards only those if there isn't, you know, enough of a rising tide to lift some of the underperforming skills and archetypes right now.
Yeah, you're completely right. What do the players want? Because they want build diversity, and a way of getting that is to have the in-game content not too difficult. And that way, you know, because obviously builds aren't going to be exactly perfect. People are going to, there's so much evolutionary pressure to work out the best builds, to have improvements on it. So something's going to be better than the others. So either there is content for them to play, in which case you get stratification like this, or there isn't, in which case there's lots of viable builds, but people are bored and have no aspirational content. I kind of prefer the one with more content, to be honest.
I agree. The one with more content is, for all intents and purposes, better. But I think that GGG needs to be very clear that that content is not meant for the average player. Right? They're usually just kind of silent on that, right? Just if you reach it, you reach it. If you don't, you don't. Just kind of, brush it under the rug. But I think if they were a little more vocal with saying, like, look, this is for the top tiers of players. This content is not meant for the average player. And don't have specifically, like, have good uniques and item drops, from that top tier content, but not specifically like build defining stuff, to where you literally can't play a build if you don't have the ability to do that content type of thing.
Honest,
Yeah.
So
But that-
just as a questions, because all this sounds really positive, but this is something that I hear a lot of is, well, Chris is just going to come on, he's going to appease
League, I gave them a mandate of the uniques are going to be good. We will only release good uniques. It is a failure if we announce them on stream and people are like, Chazzy wants your unique.
If you watch any Cesarian, you know that this is something that he often talks about. Chase uniques in the game, right? Something to work towards. Again, I touched on this earlier. I like to farm Shaper to get the Shaper swords. I like those weapons. I like thematic things. I like things to work towards. I want to know that I go farm this boss to get, and if I do it enough times, I'll get this item. A very good example. This is, farming Uber Elder for good Watcher's Eyes. I don't particularly love the Uber Elder fight. It's a very good fight. It's a very well-designed fight. I'm not in love with it, but I will repeatedly do it. If you give me the fragments, I will run it for hours on end because I love the idea of having a specific item, which is Watcher's Eyes, that come from that boss that are very valuable to everybody. And they have a wide range of things that they can roll. You can get some extremely expensive ones, and you can get some very mediocre ones. It makes that content repeatable, which I think is very important.
It's. I mean, obviously they're going to say that now anyway, but we're only releasing some good, powerful uniques. We want, it ties in with the concept of chase items, right? We want uniques that people are damn excited to find. And I think we've released a few too many remedial or niche ones recently. And I completely agree. If the league doesn't have compelling uniques, then it's just a question of how much currency does it give me? And how much currency, we can't win that question. If it doesn't give enough currency, we lose all our players and hence lose millions of dollars. And if it gives too much currency, we set ourselves up for later, where Ultimatum's handing out multiple chaos per area on average.
It's a lose-lose situation for them. And there's a very fine line that they need to balance on. We're going to continue the chase item conversation at 2:15:30 here, where it seems like there might be a little bit of a misunderstanding between what the GGG staff thinks a chase item is and what somebody like myself or Cesarian thinks a chase item is.
Plus breach stones or whatever. So I don't know what the team is intending for the rewards there, but I'd be very surprised if it was just flood the player with currency.
You mentioned the importance of chase items. Why do you feel like there's an increasing amount of feeling amongst the community that there are fewer and fewer chase items that people are excited about?
I'm hesitant to say this because the answer is going to be they're all out of touch with their own game, but when we get all the designers in the room and say, what do people mean about no chase items? Everyone looks around blankly and say, they what now? Because as far as we're concerned, there are just the same number of chase items that existed before. In fact, in the core drop pool, we've dumped in hundreds of league-specific unique ones that were compelling that can now drop from anything. And I suspect it's a semantics difference.
What is a chase item, right? Again, we're going to go back, in my opinion, things like Aziri's Flask, Aziri's Boots, right? That's a chase item. You go farm, you're chasing Aziri specifically to get those items. The Shaper Swords, the Watcher's Eyes, those things specifically. And they say there's the same amount of chase items as there was before, and while that is technically true, right, the Shaper Swords are still there. They didn't leave, but they were nerfed into the ground, right? They were nerfed because they were too strong, and then very shortly after that, we get the ability to craft items, with Harvest and whatnot, that are significantly better than the Shaper Swords. The Shaper Swords, they were nerfed into the ground, and even in their previous form, they still would barely compete with a average to high top end weapon. I mean, we're crafting 6, 7, 8, 9, sometimes even 1,000 DPS weapons, right? Somebody sent me a PUB yesterday, and their staff was like 926 PDPS. But the Shaper swords were too strong? Come on.
Right? Like when Zizaran talks about it, for example, he talks about deterministic-ish drops from bosses where he wants the idea of farming a specific boss to try to find a unique. Whereas when I think of a chase item, I think of the reason I am playing this game and killing regular monsters is he might drop a mirror or might drop a headhunter.
That's not
which is, a term maybe I get from Magic
but...
cards, where a chase rare is something that I want to open a lot of booster packs to try to find. We definitely want there to be these chase items, right? Like everything we are doing is trying to have the drop.
I understand why he used that Magic the Gathering analogy, but it kind of actually fortifies, no pun intended, Zizarian and myself's opinion on this. He uses Magic the Gathering where he says you open up a bunch of packs to and your chase item is an expensive rare, mythic rare, whatever card, but and he's saying that doesn't correlate to chasing down a specific boss to farm a specific item. But it does, because Magic the Gathering breaks down their sets into into specific names, right? So if you want to buy, if you need a rare from Zendikar, you go buy packs of Zendikar Magic cards, right? If you need an Alpha card, you go buy packs of Alpha, even though it's nearly impossible. But if you are doing the same thing, right? If you need an item from Aziri, you go farm Aziri. If you need an item from from Shaper, you go farm Shaper, right? So his example he gave there with Magic cards kind of reinforces what we were looking at.
Will be compelling. The words core drop pool come out of my mouth twice a day at work in terms of we're going to put more good stuff in it. We want more interesting currency items to exist in the game. We want more Headhunter-esque uniques. We turn on reliquary crees occasionally in the core drop pool, and we definitely want it so that there's this excitement that any monster could drop something incredibly valuable. If we're approaching the wrong thing here, and by chase items players want a different thing, then please let us know.
Please let him know if you feel that way, because he needs to know. I don't think this is a situation of one thing or the other. There's both. We want to, obviously you should be able to get a Headhunter, or a Mirror of Kalandra, or whatever from just killing regular mobs, but also should have chase items from specific mobs that you go and farm, right? We already have that with div cards, sort of. You instead of farming a specific boss, you farm a specific area. We would like that for specific bosses too. It gives us repeatable content, a reason to do repeatable content.
I should add, though, that the new uniques we're working on are meant to be very exciting ones. And so I would like it if there are more Headhunters in the game. A lot more things.
Not everybody will agree with that. I mean, I don't mind Headhunters in the game so long as, they're hard to get. All right, let me scroll down here. Did that. Oh, this is actually a good one. 218.45. This kind of gives Chris Wilson a little bit of insight into what somebody's thinking about.
Stuff?
Well, if the answer is make better uniques, we're trying, right? Like, it's implicitly a power creep thing, though, right? Like, is a Shav special these days? It's not worth that much in the regular league, right? Are we excited about Shav drops anymore? The item still does what it did in the past.
I would be excited if it dropped from a boss. Sorry.
Did you see the look on Chris Wilson's face there when Raze QT said that, where he was mildly taken back and surprised that Raze QT came up and said that? Because I think right here he kind of has a realization that oh, maybe we do have the wrong idea of what people want from boss drops. Yes, having a Shav, being able to farm a Shavs is a build defining item. Literally can't play those builds in solo self-found or whatever if you don't have a way of farming that item. Now if Shavs specifically drop from the boss that it's supposed to drop from, that you would think it would drop from, then in something like solo self-found or even in Trade League, if you don't have the currency to buy that item, you can instead attempt to get that item through farming that boss. And I think that's a very good idea, and it gives people something to do.
So what's the
And
reason you want to drop from a boss? Is that because it's a deterministic farming thing where you want to, like, I want a Shavs, therefore I'm going to kill this boss 50 times to get it? Is that the
I think
kind
in
of
order to
experience?
chase something, you have to be able to know where it is.
That right there, Ziggy D I think what he just threw out was the most important thing I think anybody said, in my opinion, in this podcast. In order to chase a thing, you need to know where it is, right? Shavs can drop from quite literally anywhere. You cannot say, I want a Shavs, and then just go specifically farm a Shavs. It's not possible, right? You just go kill stuff and you hope it drops, essentially. I think Ziggy's take on that is extremely important.
To an extent. at
yeah.
least.
Add to that as well, like the game has sort of been moving away from the feeling of, you know, this pack of monsters that I kill could drop a mirror, could drop an exalt or whatever, as more and more league mechanics and more systems in the game specifically shunt their rewards into little boxes.
That's a good take, and I don't think they continue this conversation very much after this, but killing the mobs in a lot of recent leagues don't drop the items, and they do get put into boxes, right? And then you open the chest. Like, look at Blight, for example, or even the chest mechanic in Expedition here and stuff like that. Legion does it also. And I don't think that's something that GGG intends to keep doing. I think they want to get away from that. I think Chris actually even says that in response. And I think that's very important. $221.50. Sorry, I lost my place there.
One's told. That was my point.
To harp on chase uniques a bit more, one thing I think wasn't mentioned here was that we've seen a lot of nerfs over time to a lot of the exciting chase drops, that especially dropping from bosses like Shaper's Swords and various other things. What's the... I know, like, on a case-by-case basis, many times the intent has been like, this is outclassing all rares. I think that's like less the case now, and now in many cases they don't even reach minimum viability standards for a lot
They
of
don't. The
players,
Shaper Swords
especially
are
in softcore.
mostly unusable.
Maybe they need a buff pass.
Simply put.
Maybe.
Maybe.
So
Maybe they need a buff pass. There you go. Simply put. Hopefully that sticks into the back of his mind, or you know when the item balancers and other devs and stuff like that, when they rewatch this podcast and you know they gather information from it, hopefully they pull that out. So we'll go. Next is a huge bit of information. Probably the most leaked thing that I talked about here. So 222.30.
we'll talk about one of the big complaints about the current state of the game is the sense of unnecessary grind in the Atlas and Maven system. Could you talk about that, please?
Yeah, the team agree, and we have some changes. Now, I want to preface this by saying that 3.17 is to fix this. 3.17, big endgame expansion. Who knows? We don't know. We haven't talked about that yet. But the point is, we'll look at this feedback, and we'll work out a good endgame system, and that's what 3.17 will be. But people are angry now. They feel that now that there is too much grind before they're at farming stage, basically, in the Atlas.
Right.
And so we have some changes for 3.16 that we're looking at. Again, these are preliminary. Okay. Oh dear, probably should have checked with more people before just reading this stuff out of our internal tools, but we'll pay the consequences. Okay, so our current plan is the following. We reduce the Atlas to 4 regions rather than 8, and this means you have to acquire far less watchstones, and the progress to farming Cyrus will be far shorter.
Essentially cutting the Atlas in half. I was expecting a lot of things from this podcast. That was not one of them.
we're reducing the atlas to have 100 maps rather than 160. So that means your atlas completion will only require 100 maps. Each one's worth 1%. And we're going to shuffle those. So every time we shuffle the locations of the maps, we auto cycle some maps in and out like we do with Zana mod rotations. All the bonuses from all of these will be increased to compensate. For example, you get +1 awakening level per 2 watchstones instead of from 4, and the map completion bonuses will be changed to provide the same total benefit, just over fewer maps. And so this takes nothing away apart from potentially some tile sets in a given league, and it means you'll be at farm status for your atlas after killing 16 conquerors instead of 32. And this will hopefully mean that the grind to get to that point is significantly reduced without cutting the journey out. And so that's what we're looking at for 3.16, to see what would happen if we just made that grind a lot shorter so you're at farming stage earlier.
Now, at the beginning of this conversation, he says 3.17 is the expansion for all of this. He does make a note that people are mad now, and they need to do something now. Now he says 3.16, we may see some of these changes. I don't know if that's conflicting information or if what he meant is that it was originally slated for 3.17 and they're going to try to push it up to 3.16. But I think that this is actually a really huge thing. I mean, obviously it's a huge thing. And I think not only will this, make people happy that they don't have the extremely long farm in the end game, but I think this might actually quell some of the people who don't like doing the grind in the story. The problem is that you need to do an extremely long campaign grind, and then you need to do an extremely long, map grind afterwards. They don't want to get rid of the campaign. So if they cut down the map grind afterwards, maybe that'll be enough. Time will tell.
I think everyone likes that.
Yeah, for 3.17, we're going to continue to make awesome stuff that we haven't even thought of yet. So I can't even spoil that.
Just on the point though of the 4 regions, so obviously that's going to impact how Atlas passives work.
Right. So here they clarify a couple of things about shortening the Atlas and whatnot. This is a question that a lot of people talk about, and in my chat also. It comes up a lot in my Twitch chat. But I like that Chris talks about this here. 23012.
Except instead of me personally getting extra money with each dividend, I've already been given extra money in the past, and now it's going to the people that gave me that extra money before. So it's a big circle. And as I'm sure you have seen by now, Tencent does not have any desire to exert any kind of control over the direction of the game, right? There has not been a single phone call going, hey, what happened with 3.15, right?
They don't care. Tencent does have the controlling stake in Grinded Gear games, right? That's a fact. Everybody knows that. Chris Wilson confirms here, Tencent doesn't care about these things. Everybody's first response is, oh, how are they making these changes? How are they losing all this money? How are they losing all these players? How are they nerfing everything, making everybody mad? Tencent's got to be pissed. This, that, and the other thing. They don't care. They're making their money, right? They're trusting Chris Wilson. It was his idea, his vision, his company, and the couple other founders also. But they're letting him do his thing. Right, so I'm glad that that's out, and he has said that out loud. 20, 35, 40. This is I made a Reddit post that got a lot of traction, almost 1,000 upvotes, about doing a league mechanic, opening 5 chests. One of them popped out an item. The other 4 were empty. I wasn't using a strict loot filter. I was using semi-strict, no changes to it. Scrolls of Wisdom still show up in a loot filter. Blacksmith whetstones, armors, things, all of it still shows up. 4 of the chests show up nothing. 1 chest, if I remember correctly, dropped a stack of League Mechanic currency, right? And I think he talks about this a little bit here.
Anonymously from our testing team was, I opened a chest and I got literally nothing. Then I opened another chest and I got nothing. These are reward chests. Where are my rewards? And we're like, but when you get splinters, you get like 6 chests worth. There's a whole lot less clicks. And they go, so you made it boring and I saved like 3 clicks. Great, you know? And
Right. So this is so a lot of people want to click less, right? But this is the flip side of clicking less if they don't change anything else in the process, right? So I got 30 splinters from one chest, and I got 0 of anything from the other chest. Not even a scroll of wisdom, not even a blacksmith whetstone, not a chromatic orb, nothing. And now I can't say this with complete certainty because it didn't happen, but I believe if each of those chests would have dropped 5 splinters, I would have been more happy than the one chest dropping, 30 or whatever, and the other one's dropping absolutely nothing. Alternatively, if those other 4 chests were just disappeared from the game, I would also be more happy. If I opened one chest, got 1 stack of currency, picked it up, I go on my way, right? It's just the act of clicking the chest that is meant to give you loot and there's nothing there. That doesn't feel good for an ARPG. Now, people in Reddit, of course, they're claiming, oh, well, you were running an unjuiced map. You were running a yellow map. It was only a magic quality. It was, you didn't do any of the stuff you're supposed to do to get loot. And my answer to that was that there's a very poor answer because you can go back to any recent League mechanic, whether it's Legion, Blight, Heist, Ultimatum, anything. You can go to any of these League mechanics, even as far back as Alpha, right? And I posted an updated clip from Twitch where I did this, where I proved this thing. You can run a 0 quantity map. White map, 0 quantity, get a Blight, a Legion, an Alva, whatever, Delirium, and run it, and they're going to give you loot. Stuff is going to loot explode for you, right? Maybe not a ton. Most of it's probably going to be junk, but stuff will pop up from your loot filter. You will have items to pick up and identify and sell, and maybe something in there is good. Chance of an exalted orb, or whatever the case may be, regal, whatever, and it feels good because that's how ARPGs work. When you have 5 chests, 1 drops an item, and 4 drop nothing, that feels very bad. It doesn't feel good. And that was kind of the point I was making with the Reddit post. I wasn't looking in my 20 quantity, blue map, whatever, magic map. I wasn't looking to get a Mirror of Kalandra, exalted orbs, or a ton of currency, or, a really rare item or anything like that. But I have scrolls of wisdom in my loot filter. And not even those popped up, right? Not even those came out of the chest. That's the problem.
we kind of had this situation where I think the thing I said to someone is, if we drop nothing, you're angry we dropped nothing. And if we drop something, you're angry we dropped something because you have to click on it. Now,
You can, I think, have no chests to begin with as one part of that. So like you kill the artifact monsters, and then you can still achieve much the same result without clicking by having like a little +5 artifacts.
I don't like Ziggy D's suggestion there. I do like getting rid of the chests, right? Have the items drop from the monsters. You're already invested in killing the monsters. Have them drop the items. I do agree with that. Having like the plus 200 of the artifact, when you open the chest or whatever, or kill the monster, I think that takes away a little bit of agency from the game, and it doesn't make it. In my personal opinion, it makes it feel less personal. Makes it feel just not quite as good. I was okay with it in Metamorph. I was fine with picking up the body parts myself. They changed it. I said, okay, well, whatever. This is cool. I didn't have a problem with it to begin with. It's whatever. I do think that there's an alternate solution, and I will suggest it later when I think we cover this in the next part.
Yeah. We are careful about auto pickup because it's a very slippery slope that leads to people wanting vacuuming of wisdom scrolls and that kind of stuff. We don't like where we ended up with this league, and we're honestly just willing to kind of like review our splinter policy, right? Like, as far as I'm concerned, we're not going to put splinters in future leagues unless they're in for a good purpose and they're valuable. Like, no one's complaining about expensive breach splinters, the ones that the good ones, like the Chayla ones or whatever, because they are worth a lot when you pick them up. And we kind of want a minimum threshold for what splinters are worth if we're even doing them in the future. We don't want to rule it out entirely, but they're not going to be spammy ones where you have to accumulate hundreds and hundreds and hundreds to do something.
Right? So that's one way. Just get rid of the splinters. They already have a ton of different splinters. And again, I mean, you need 300 simulacrum splinters to make a simulacrum, right? That's a ton of, and they used to, drop like what, one at a time. So you would have to click 300 times, to get your one simulacrum. That's a lot. Taking splinters out is definitely a solution. I think there's a better one. Let's go to 242.30, where Nuji will describe an experience and talk about his take.
Mention it yourself. When you click something and there's like an expectation of like things dropping out, and sometimes it doesn't, and then a big stack, but it's just a number. That's not very exciting. So a proposition here, like let's assume like you go to a Piranha's pack, you kill the pack, you've already decided I want to kill off the pack even though it's generally not worth my time. I click the box, there's an expectation because I already went in and decided to do it, that a bunch of coins drop out. At that point, you've already invested your time. Why is it that you then need to add any kind of tedium or like extra work at the end? Shouldn't that be the reward? And secondly, if something drops out, say unique, now that is the thing that is unexpected, right? So when you go to an Azurite node, you expect the Azurite to drop out. You zoom it up. So anytime there's like a splinter, you engage with the encounter because you expect it. So therefore, you should not expect to do the extra work. You've already decided, I go through all the animations. You can even make cooler animations, make that take a little longer, and you have then invested the player into the whole thing, rather than then adding more work at the end. And then if there's something cool dropping out, then you force the player to go and engage with that.
What's the extra work you're referring to here? The
Clicking.
click to pick up the coins?
All the
or-
clicking. And also, like, it's also that having showers of things is just exciting. And you're taking that away.
And you're taking that away, right? So they already have a system in the, I agree with what Nuji says here, right? The clicking of all of the splinters and whatnot at the end of an interaction is, it doesn't feel great because you're already investing all of your time, like you've already making the conscious effort to invest your time into killing the mobs, right? You make that decision, you kill the mobs, and you loot the items. Right? It's a lot of clicking at the end. What I don't agree with is having everything just automatically loot vacuumed, in like Metamorph does, right? You automatically get the body parts and whatnot. The thing is, they already have a system in the game which has a fair compromise between all of these things, and that is the Azurite system. Right? So what is the problem here? The problem is that you don't want to click a lot. You still want to see the loot explosion because that feels good, right? That's why you're playing the ARPG. You want the loot explosion. That's why you're playing a loot-based game. But you should still need some investment to pick that item up. It shouldn't be automatically done, and that's what Chris's take is. There needs to be some type of even if it's just a click, some type of investment to pick up the item. And Azurite already does all of this stuff, right? You go into a delve, you complete the Azurite node, it drops 50, 100 Azurite splinters onto the ground. You click one, and it picks everything up in a radius, right? And if you're running around, in the area, it'll pick up, the whole entire screen's worth, right? With one click. It already exists in the game. You can do that with the splinters, right? If I go and I do a Pirandus event, and I take the time, I kill the Pirandus mobs, I open the box, bing, 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 100 coins drop on the ground. I don't want to pick up 100 coins, individually, obviously. I don't want to pick them up in 10 stacks of 10. I want to click one time, and it picks up all of the stacks, right? It picks up all similar stacks that are around you, right? And you can apply this to a ton of other things in the game. You kill a group of mobs, and 6 scrolls of wisdom drop. I click one scroll of wisdom, it picks up all of the scrolls of wisdom in that area. I'm getting the explosion of loot. I'm making the investment to kill the mob. I'm making the investment to click the scroll of wisdom to pick it up, and I'm getting 6, 7, 8 scrolls of wisdom that are in the very tight vicinity for that one click. It already exists in the game, and it's not suggested in this podcast anywhere. I mean, Nuji talks about how Azerite works, but he doesn't talk about applying that system to other things.
With regard to the clicking, the system we're discussing here is basically having one click to get the stuff at the end. We don't see that as a lot of extra work. And I agree, it does kind of suck if you replace a cool shower of stuff with a single stack. Now, maybe there are compromises where you can still essentially have a shower animation. That item is quite flashy when it drops a pile of coins, but it's still one click.
So what he's talking about with one click isn't what I was just saying, as far as I'm aware. What he's talking about with one click is what they've implemented in this league mechanic, where it's dropping a stack of 30 instead of 3 stacks of 10 or whatever, which obviously doesn't feel as good in terms of elite explosion because you're only getting that 130 drop, one ping on your loot filter, it doesn't feel as good.
We have problems with the idea of vacuuming real items in the game. That's probably not going to happen. I think this approach here will reduce the clicking. Back in the old days, and I'm not saying this was any better, but in D2,
where he draws
you open
a
one of those chests that drops a lot of coins, and you get a lot of gold.
Comparison
on the ground.
to
We don't
Diablo.
have gold, and it kind of was annoying picking all of those up by hand. But there was something relatively, I don't know, it was a process. And nowadays, of course, that process isn't acceptable for players. And we will try to get some kind of flashy effect as much as we can, but it will probably just be a single click to receive that stuff. We're probably not going to go as
I
far
just
as
want to.
vacuuming
I have to chill for a second here.
as it stands, we're looking at solutions like removing every tester, getting new testers where we legally sign a contract with them, where we threaten to sue if they leak stuff, for example, and that's
GGG, Chris Wilson. I will test. I will sign. I will not leak. I will shill. Yeah. Come on. Let's go. The next really important thing is accessibility in the game, right? And this comes in 324. We skipped quite a far. They had a lot of back and forth and talk and stuff like here. Repeating things that have been talked about in the past. So we're going to skip ahead
some
quite
power
a bit.
creep that goes with it. But when we do that, we have to make sure it's alongside robust systems to find them and craft them and chase them and so on.
On that, how do you communicate to the player that there is a better upgrade for them? So right now, if you find something off the ground and it has this damage on it, it's really difficult for someone to understand their upgrade path. Right, with Bestiary, you have all these beasts you can look at, but it's not really something people use. However, with crafting, if I have physical damage on a weapon, I would like to upgrade it. I would like to know, how do I get there? Could there be say an encyclopedia in the game where these are the possible mods of you can get up to Merciless? The thing is,
this already exists in the game, but it's not given to the players, right? We already have PoEDB and Craft of Exile. PoEDB and Craft of Exile get this information from the game directly, right? It's in the files, right? It's in the game. It's there. It exists. But this information is not communicated to the players in game in any way, shape, or form. So the information exists in the game. People know how to extract it from the game, and they use it as a third-party situation, which PoE's done for a very long time now, relying on third-party help to pick up the shortcomings in the game. I do think that it would be a huge benefit for GGG to partner with these third-party people, to partner with PoEDB, to partner with PoE Lab, to partner with Craft of Exile, and have those things implemented into the game, not have to go to a third-party website. Same thing with advanced PoE trade and the logout macro, and being able to use advanced PoE trade to pull up an item and search with mods specifically right from that overlay. Something like that shouldn't be a third-party overlay. Something like that should be in the game, right? That's all things that PoE should be able to say, look what we have. Instead, they have to say, well, look what other people have done for us because we haven't done it for ourselves. And I think that would be a huge step in the direction of helping new players and just getting the information into the game so you don't have to use outside resources quite as much. Now, obviously, there should still be a wiki and stuff like that. And if you need to look up some really niche interactions and stuff like that, I mean, you'll have to look that up online. But the way it is right now, you have to look up quite literally, I mean, like everything outside of the game. And I don't think that's really the way it should be. Well, this is a big one that's probably going to upset a lot of people. We'll go to 330 to 11.
Path of Exile 2 has unique content all the way through. Now, in addition to this, we're aware of the fact that there are players who are wanting to play through to endgame, and while we're never going to offer them the ability to skip there, we are aware of the...
We are never going to offer them the ability to skip to the endgame, a la an adventure mode, D3, or very rough example, getting rushed in D2, right? You just don't have to interact with the acts or the story or anything like that. GGG, not GGG as a whole maybe, but at least Chris Wilson very specifically, he takes a lot of pride into the campaign of the game, and he thinks that it's a very important part of the game. And again, if that's his vision, it's his, that's his baby. This is his game. This is his design. This is what he wants for his thing. He says that it can be solved through having a campaign that is engaging and fun to play through. I don't mind the campaign so much myself. I did 20 years of time playing through the D3 or D2 campaign without being rushed. I mean, I've had my fair share of characters rushed, trust me. But I've played through that story hundreds of times. So playing through the PoE campaign is a walk in the park. Once you get good at it, you can have it done in 6 hours. If you're a speed runner, just a couple of hours, right? It's not a big deal. I do wish, if I had to make a compromise, that you had to run your first character through the campaign, all the way through the 10 acts, and then future characters for that league were able to level in Infinite Delve or specific leveling maps or something of that nature. I will say, personally, there have been times that I've wanted to re-roll or try a new character, and I just didn't because I couldn't be asked to go through the campaign again. Right? I had already done it 3 times this league. Right? I'm not doing it again. So hopefully we can find a middle ground. Not getting rid of the campaign directly, because also not only would it offend Chris's vision of the game, but also the artists and the storytellers and the developers and whatnot. They're putting their hours of work into designing these things, right? And so obviously GGG wants these things to be used. You don't want to just skip the story, and because if you give people that option, nobody's ever going to run the campaign again, and all of their work is going to go to waste. So I understand. 339.50. This is something that I've talked about quite a bit right here.
Which I think, little things. Why are wisdom scrolls a thing?
Why are wisdom scrolls a thing? Why are they in the game? Okay, I'll compromise. Don't take them out of the game. But there should be... This situation was solved 20 years ago. The PoE calls itself the spiritual successor to Diablo 2. Diablo 2 already has a system in place to mitigate this problem of wisdom scrolls, right? If you want to individually identify your items in Diablo 2, you have your scrolls of wisdom. You have your ID scrolls. If you want to identify your entire inventory in one go, you have Deckard Cain. The problem already has a solution, right? make a quest in Act 1, the end of Act 1, beginning of Act 2 or something, where, or even put it at the end of the game, so at least you have it for maps, right? Put it at the end of the campaign. Who cares? You complete a quest. Oh, and there's already a character that could even do this for you, and it's the guy. It's Siosa in the library. Give you the ability to move Siosa to your hideout. You talk to him. He identifies the items in your inventory. It's already there. Or he gives you one of the pedestals in the library with a book on it. And the book is a big ID scroll book. It's a tome of ID scrolls. You click the book, it identifies the items in your inventory. There's so many solutions that already exist. So that way, you still, you don't want items to drop already identified. That's not good. And they go on to talk about this, how that would affect loot filters and whatnot. But, so there needs to be, just like with picking up items, there needs to be at least a little bit of investment in where, you have to at least click, and then it'll, pick up all like items in the area. Same thing with IDing. You need to at least click something to identify the items. And the Deckard Cain style of approach has already solved that problem.
I guess.
I agree.
You talked about it a little bit earlier, how people don't pick them up anyway, and you have to use them to identify these items that you never equip on your character anyway, because you can't really ever get a reasonable upgrade through picking up an item from the ground, because influence items exist that you then have to research from outside of the game, yada yada. Wisdom scrolls seem pointless.
Ideally, players will enjoy finding rare items and looking at them. There'll be a situation where you find an item on the ground and say, this could be good, and I'm going to enjoy the process of unraveling it, right?
I agree.
Now, the client knows what the stats of the items are before you pick it up, right? You can see it while it's on the ground by hovering over it, and item filters can filter on those. If we do not have wisdom scrolls, then item filters can filter to only show you the best items. And that sounds like a great thing, but it really is not. It creates a situation where there's even less thinking. The item filter tells you how to play. Basically, if an item appears, it's going to be an upgrade and so on. We feel it's both important for the weight of the items, which I know is a term people hate, and the anticipation of seeing what it is, and also from a technical point of view, to have it so that there's the unwrapping process. This system does not work well at the moment because there are so many items. It is tedious, it is a chore, you're completely right to question it, and we have to solve itemization. But I feel the correct choice here is to solve itemization and then assess whether the wisdom scrolls are necessary. I personally believe they will be. I think they serve a valuable purpose, and I know they're not in a great state at the moment, but I'd rather do a proper fix. It'll be super easy, trust me, some of the changes the community are requesting, we could just do all of them in 3.16, and then we'd be very, very unhappy with the game, and it would probably do better, right? I want to do what we feel is right for the game in a way that makes people happy and takes into account the long-term stuff. And so that's why sometimes we're going to do harder solutions rather than the easy, fast ones that we think are in the wrong direction.
We could just right-click them, though. You
Yeah.
don't have to drop them ID, because dropping them ID is a whole other can of worms. Like that,
Mhm.
like you said, allows you to filter items based on mods. But we can just right-click them without having to pick up and manage scrolls and
Love
keep
you
that
guys.
in our inventory and stuff like that.
Well, I appreciate the feedback. We'll keep examining it, but for the time being, we like wisdom scrolls, and I think that there's a lot that could be better involving the whole system of the amount of items you have to look at the moment.
I agree that better itemization will help that problem, and possibly even solve it. But the thing is, if I'm in a map and I've picked up 25 rings, I don't want to click to identify 25 rings. I don't mind having a little bit of investment. I click Deckard Cain. I click identify items, right? I've already invested the time to kill the mobs. I've invested the time to pick up the 25 rings. I still have to invest the time to click Deckard Cain, and I still have to invest the time to look at the 25 rings and decide what of this is usable, what of this is sellable, what of this is trash, right? I think the part where you have to individually click 25 rings to identify them is the problem, right? So if we can squash that down into one click or something, with a big tome, you click to identify items, or Siosa comes to your hideout, or whatever the case may be. I think there's ways to do it. They do go on to talk here randomly about a little bit of a balance thing with monsters, which I was very interested in. So I'm gonna pull that up here. we're getting
Is
ready to
there
wrap up.
something you've thought about in terms of looking into that?
We don't think that rare monster mods are in a good situation at all.
They're not.
One of the changes that we recently moved out of 316 into currently 317 is to completely replace all rare monster mods in the game with stuff that are easier to understand visually at a glance and kind of, simpler and more impactful, so monsters don't have like 5 properties that will stack in the same way. Maybe a monster does 1 or 2 things, which could stack in extreme situations, but there's less kind of just general spam of monster stuff going on. This is an early idea that we have, but we're not at all happy with some of the things to do with the way that the stuff stacks, or the way there's too much stuff to read, and it's just a bit of a mess to try to understand rare monsters. And so we want to improve this. Currently, this is not slated for 316 because there's actually quite a lot of work to do it properly. There may be other changes we can make in 316 to do with the aura stacking kind of problem on rares. Philosophically, we do like the fact that occasionally content combines together in a way that makes it hard. Having interesting stuff where that guy's fast and hits hard, I should be careful of him, is okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we all agree on the philosophy there. It's just that it gets a bit out of hand in some cases, and then it's one-hit kill zone.
Right. I think he's pretty spot on with everything that was said there. So the problem is that it's a compounding problem with the more mobs you have in the area, and again, this is a little bit of a divide between the zoomers and the casual players. The zoomers don't care quite as much because they're most of the time killing the entire screen before they even see it, or just as they're seeing it, right? So it's not a problem. But the average player, so what happens is you're running in the map, you find a mob of enemies, and it has a rare mob in there that has a modifier. It says, nearby allies are frenzied or something like that, right? And you're like, oh, whoa, I'm not ready for this fight yet, right? So you're running, and it compounds with the next mob that you find, right? Now all these enemies are frenzied, and maybe they have a rare mob in there that says, nearby enemies deal significantly more damage, right? And then you run, so you're like, oh wow, this is even harder now. I can't do this, right? And you run to the next mob, and the problem just keeps compounding as these auras keep, stacking on top of each other. And then also you can see in other League content that spawns a lot of monsters at the same time, such as Heist, right? In Heist, you have like 20 rare mobs that are just flooding you at all times. You see this in Legion, where all these Legion mobs are getting extremely buffed if you clear the whole thing. Not only that, but they have extremely ranged attacks that attack you from 2 screens away, especially if you're not using a widescreen monitor. And you have there just is no counterplay to that, right? I mean, it's similar to Awakener, hitting you with a die beam from off the screen when you're trying to re-enter the arena. There's not a counterplay to that. You just hope it doesn't happen. Most of the time it won't, but when it does, it feels bad.
I think the main issue has been your League design. I think that Heist was. I honestly don't even know what you're thinking. Allowing 20 rares to come together, spawning repeatedly.
Right, exactly. And a lot of that, yeah, and you don't. I feel like they made a change in this league, because with the runic mobs and stuff like that, you still get a lot of rares on top of each other, and you're even picking. I guess the problem is that you're look at Chris Wilson's face. I guess the problem is, or the fix is that you're picking the mobs, right? So in Expedition, you are choosing what mods you want to have on the enemy. So if it's too strong, that's on you. So that feels better naturally. And so I think if they want to rework the aura system, I think that'd be a huge improvement into the game. So we'll go to, I think it's like our closing statements here. So we'll go to 353.45. I think Chris Wilson here, he talks about something that's very, very important outside of Path of Exile itself.
Just that gap there. How do you improve the communication?
Well, Reddit is a tricky one because, it actually really makes us quite upset to read it. I know I just crossed off 2 things on the bingo card, maybe 3, but here's the thing. I am a person with strong mental health, right? I've been very blessed in my life of not really having had any bad episodes, and I use my calm, rock-like thing to run the company, and everyone's like, shit's going down, Chris, it's on fire, why aren't you stressed out? And I'm thinking, because I've got to be calm for everyone. But I can't read the Reddit the last few months, right? It's even before the recent fire. And so it's cool. I hire people and they read it for me and summarize and tell me which threads to check out and look at the feedback on and say, don't go below post number 3. And it's rough, and I hate to think how it's affecting some developers that are a bit more fragile, right? Like, there's so many personal attacks. It's just, but every person there is a passionate player who wants the game to be better for them, if you know what I mean, right?
Right. So I'm very much like Chris, and like in my job, I don't let things affect me. I don't have episodes. I don't get anxiety. I'm not fragile. None of those things. So I do have a little bit of trouble relating to the people who do have those problems, because I don't, but I do have the ability to recognize that these more fragile people are having a hard time. I would not want, well, I take that back. I do want Bex's job. I would love to be a community manager. But I couldn't imagine like the things that a lot of these people need to read from the Reddit posts is just insane. If you don't have that calm rock-like ability, it's got to tear you up reading that Reddit every day. You're putting your passion into doing something. I'm a cook outside of work, right? Or outside of streaming. I'm a cook, and I can relate it a little bit to when somebody says, "Dude, this didn't taste good," right? Or this was done wrong, or worst case scenario, you didn't cook this all the way, right? Which luckily has never happened to me. I've never served like raw chicken to somebody or anything like that, thankfully. But I imagine that that's what these GGG employees feel like when they go into the Reddit and have these personal attacks. Sometimes, as far as death threats and KYS and and stuff like that, and it's just insane. It's just a game. These people have a passion, and it might not be exactly what what you want in the game, but it's not that serious. So just chill out, chill out. These people are humans. You might not see their faces, but they're humans, and you need to treat them like humans, And with that, I think that's where we're going to wrap up. I think that's a good spot to wrap up on this, right? Is treating people like they deserve to be treated. And that doesn't mean poorly. Not at all. But I thank you, everybody, for, if you've made it this far in the video, for watching. It was a lot of content to cover. I'm going to, as you can tell, I don't use this YouTube channel very much. I want to change that. I want to make more content, not specifically for Path of Exile. We play a lot of games on the stream, and I want to make more use of this channel, right? I will be playing more Path of Exile, a ton of it. I'm having a ton of fun right now playing Eye of Winter. Reminds me of Diablo 2. I love Diablo 2, so that's the plan. So come find us over at twitch.tv/itchojimbo, and make sure you subscribe on here, turn on notifications, so you can know when we post our next video, which will hopefully be soon. Till then, cheers, everybody. I'll see you later.